Thanks for checking out my video. Now, before the tirade of negative comments that I won't get because nobody cares enough to watch my videos anyway, I want to point out that I really wanted Enshrouded to be a good game. Since it was first advertised, I was excited for it because it hit a lot of key aspects in a co-op RPG that I was after for me and my friends. Despite the controversy I never aired around being banned from the Discord for asking why there was an NDA for players in the beta, which I never signed, and the massive issue of crashing on 10 series Nvidia cards, which thankfully has been fixed for the early access, I was super eager to hit the ground running with Enshrouded, so much so that I stayed up till 2 AM just to purchase the game as soon as it ticked over. Of course, I tested it for only about 30 minutes before going to bed, but over the next week I'd be able to play with my friends and experience what it had to offer. And I'm actually pretty disappointed. But before I go into why, I wanted to point out some of the things I was looking forward to that I think have worked out pretty well. Combat, from melee to ranged and spellcasting, I actually think is fun. The action-based third-person controller feels well enough to pass the standard for launch. I've only found a few bugs like speeding up a mountain by button mashing, and some iffy camera movement when in close quarters scenery and target locked. Having to zoom around a tree can also sometimes feel a bit off, but overall the dynamics of combat work okay. I would have liked to have seen mantling added alongside the glider and grapple, but overall I don't mind how I traverse the world space. I also love the building mechanic, which to be fair is probably the primary feature of Enshrouded. It took me about a day to realise I didn't actually have to manually pickaxe out caves, as the terrain manipulator tool is a way better option for this. Being able to sculpt fine detail and create unique structures really feels great though. Admittedly all I made was a dank necromancer lair, but overall I'm really enjoying the building experience. Now this is where the game starts to fall down. It's a problem of game design which isn't unique to Enshrouded, but is hugely apparent based on what Enshrouded is trying to be. From the advertising, the game is meant to be a co-op RPG experience with survival elements, but mechanics-wise, it is feeling more like a survival game with co-op RPG elements. To explain what I mean here, let's take the prime example of a survival game, Rust. Unlike Enshrouded, Rust is a PvP-focused game. Whilst it does have some environmental threats, its main focus is on harvesting materials to not only survive, but increase your equipment tier to become competitive against your neighbours and battle for the supremacy of your server. The core game loop here is to gather the materials, build the next tier of equipment that will allow you to begin harvesting the next tier of materials for the next tier of equipment, and repeat that cycle until you're at the top tier, and then you can join in the combat or the endgame content, so to speak. This works for PvP games, but Enshrouded only wants to be co-op and focus on exploration and adventure. The problem is, it locks that adventure behind the same mechanical loop of harvesting materials to prepare your gear for the adventure. It also sullies the exploration side of the game because, yes, you do have to explore to find these components, but the problem is it's forcing you to explore. This makes exploration more of a chore than an experience, and chores equate to grind. I found that going through the first tier of content has made the majority of my time spent going to random locations on the map, finding so-called quests that just lead me to a new location to harvest basic ingredients that I'm supposed to then use to craft the gear that I need to explore the dungeons. But then I find that the dungeons themselves are about 10-minute dives with 3 to 4 puzzles and the same monsters I've fought along in the wilds whilst harvesting. This forced push to get the things that I need leads my group to focus more on trying to get the chore out of the way faster, which leads us to miss out on the full exploration and discovery aspect of the game. And this is really upsetting to see with Enshrouded, as its map is static, in the sense that it was a predetermined build. It's not procedural content for each playthrough, it was crafted by design to give you an experience. But it's falling flat because I'm not following a path to discovery, I'm just blindly stumbling around finding fragments of a tale and adventure. This lack of cohesion is detracting from what would otherwise be a fun game. I'm also letting my love and hope for the game get in the way of making some nasty perceptions of the developers. Like I said, the dungeons so far have only been a few minutes jaunt, with some very basic puzzle solving, bosses that aren't that difficult, and enemies that I've fought a few times over already. This means the core component of the game, dungeon dives, are really only a fraction of the gameplay runtime. This is actually quite common in game design. When you only have a limited amount of content, you pad it out with menial chores or grinding, and suddenly your game has increased its average playtime by hundreds of %. What upsets me here is that I was expecting Enshrouded to be far less of that and offer more reward for my time played. Another issue I've found so far is the Fallout 76 experience, being a lack of life in the world. I know the law is that humanity is destroyed and we are reawakened in an effort to bring it back, but like 76, the lack of interactive NPCs beyond your flesh and blood workbenches leads to a world that feels lifeless and unenjoyable. I keep finding remnants of towns and villages that would be lovely if they could spring back to life with NPC actors after you've cleared them, just to give you more motivation to go on. Though to be fair, I haven't played enough of the game yet to know if this is or isn't something that actually happens, or if it's something that the devs plan on adding later on in development. I think it's fair to compare Enshrouded with Conan Exiles in this regard. Both games focus heavily on dungeons and monsters, though Exiles does feature PvP and reasons to build your base in certain ways, but the handling of NPCs in the world gives Conan Exiles map a greater feeling of life and a more enjoyable experience of exploration, despite having similar difficulties in the grind and harvesting by tier. All in all, I don't think the main problem is a fixable one for Enshrouded. It would require a complete redevelopment of the progression system, which reminds me, I had a smaller gripe against the way they manage classes in the game. Locking behind a skill tree is a perfectly fine thing to do, but locking the equipment behind the exploration and discovery bit meant that I had to play and craft through each class that I didn't want before getting to the one that I did. Then I ended up with spent materials and loose equipment I shouldn't have had to have. Going back to my main gripe though, it's the grinding harvest loop. It doesn't need to be here. My solution would be to have the basic materials for each tier of weapon be bountiful and all over the habitable areas of the map, meaning I don't have to spend more than 5 minutes trekking through untold dangers just to get a smidgen of the material I need, or enough for half of one set when I'm in a team of 4 people. Because at the end of the day, preparation for an adventure is fine and dandy and can be fun. It's part of the planning. But I don't want to have to plan for the adventure being to gather the materials I need for the adventure, because that isn't an adventure. Now, I know this sounds silly, because why go adventuring if you have everything you need? But I'm not actually suggesting that I can make the ultimate legendary weapon right off the bat with minimal effort. Instead, I want to be able to craft the kind of gear I need to make my dungeon delve playable. I don't want to waste my time grinding just to be at the level I need to be to have the dungeon a playable challenge. For this, a crafting system that allows you to create a generic gear at a certain level will make me dungeon ready, and my reward can be finding the special materials to add to that gear and upgrade it with special powers, stats, or effects that alter my gameplay in a unique way, or find a legendary weapon with special powers that can't be replicated by crafting. This will allow for feeling rewarded for my efforts of trekking through a dungeon, and lets me spend my game time on travelling to and clearing out a dungeon, rather than 80% of my time grinding and only 20% of the dungeon game. I won't play on this next problem too long because I'm still of two minds about it, but it has been raised on the suggestion forum and by the devs themselves. Your base is your base. It's cool to carve out your own little area in the map, but it doesn't actually serve anything more than just a nice aesthetic. Unlike Valheim, there are no sieges from enemy waves. There's no need to build a defensive position or a fortification. The developers stated that this is because they want you to focus on the adventure, without having to cut it short to return home and defend. Now, I can see their point, but I feel like I want my base to also serve some sort of functionality. I haven't quite figured out a solution to this yet, so if you think you have, feel free to post in the comments, or better yet, post on the suggestion page for the game. At the end of the day, I'm still going to play through to the end. I want to experience the story, I really do. I just hope that moving forward, the devs will open the door to modders, which might then lead on to stripping away some of the things that will allow us for a keener focus on the adventure. I also appreciate what they've achieved with the voxelized landscape. It's given me hope for the terraforming in my own game, and these problems I've discovered with material harvesting has helped me refine the similar mechanics in my game too. But after all that, I'm just one nerd with slightly more hair but only a fraction of the personality. Hey, at least I write my own content. Yes, I am less than desperate for your comments below, but if you play Enshrouded, I'm keen to know what your take is on it. Once again, thanks for watching.